thank you all for coming out to this session. We have a very, very exciting topic to talk to you all about here today. We have here with us Dr. Hilary Cottam, who'll be talking about the impact of social welfare and the changes that we'll be seeing over the course of the next technology revolutions in the fourth industrial revolution. A lot of her work has focused in what that sort of new age of social welfare looks like. She is a World Economic Forum YGL, and she also, interestingly enough, has won an award as the UK Designer of the Year. So with that, I want to invite Dr. Cottam up here at the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to ask you if you can imagine what it feels like to be out of work, or perhaps to be locked in a job that you really hate. In Britain, if you're out of work, there's a service for you. You can go to a job centre, you can join a queue, and you get advice filling out job applications, and you get a benefits check. And over the years, the computers have appeared on the desks, and the benefit checks is a bit lower than it used to be. But essentially, if you were a time traveller from the 1940s, 50s, when these systems were invented, you could rock up, join the queue in the job centre, and you would know exactly what to do. And these systems, which cost billions to operate, have a 66% failure rate. When I work in a job centre, I meet people going around for the second, the third, the 15th time. And is it any surprise that these systems that were designed after the Second World War are not functioning in the fourth industrial revolution? Because the world of work is changing so fast, so deeply, and continuing to change. How could we possibly expect these kinds of systems to work? So I'm a social entrepreneur, and I went to a job centre in South London, and I put up a huge door with this big poster saying, "Get me out of here." And I asked anybody in the job centre out of work if they wanted to try a new approach, if they could pay me $5, they could come through the door and do something else. And actually, so many people wanted to pay me money that I had to keep raising the price by the hour. And people came through because they felt ashamed, humiliated to be in this job centre line, but also because they were convinced that standing in the line wasn't going to find them work. And they're right. Can you all think for a moment how you found your last job? How did you find your last job? It was actually probably through somebody you know. And even if you answered an advert or the headhunter called you, it's most likely that it was a friend that showed you the ad, or it was somebody you know that told the headhunter to call you. And today, 8 out of 10 jobs are not advertised anywhere in the world. So it turns out that the best route to work is a relationship, and all those people who wanted to leave the job centre were right. And everywhere we look in the world, from health to employment to education, we see the same thing. We see that our modern social systems are still copies of those post-war ideas. And in the Second World War, we had this explosion in new forms of social organization. So we had the United Nations in 1945, we had the growth and the proliferation of the trades union movement, we had in 1942 the foundation of organizations like Oxfam, new state welfare all around the world. And what I want to suggest to you today is that however great these systems were, now, in our fourth industrial revolution, we ourselves need a social revolution on exactly this scale. That the systems and services that we inherited from the last century, the very mindsets that we have, cannot confront the challenges we face today. That we have to reinvent how we frame the problem, how we design the solution, and how we collaborate and organize for social change today. So I started out about 3 decades ago working in Africa and Latin America. I worked for a large international not-for-profit. I worked for UNICEF, for the World Bank. Everywhere I was part of these very well-meant programs to change the lives of others. And again, what I saw was how people working with the best of intentions were unable to make change because of the mores, the regulations, the systems of those institutions. And I saw something else as well. I saw that policies that look absolutely logical inside the walls of these institutions look completely different when they hit the ground in communities. And I thought, I need to work in a different way. And I moved to a barrio in Latin America, a place of 40,000 people that live in this network of open sewers. And I was there without any agenda, just to listen, to learn. And it was the beginning for me of a new way of working. I started to create the methods and approaches that I use today that are very design-based. They're about building open, low-cost solutions, and they're about human connection. And these solutions don't start by asking people, how can we fix this service? How can we make what we do better? They start in the homes and the lives of people, asking people, what are you trying to do? What do you need? How could I help you with what you're already trying to do? And so this work brings me into contact with people like Anne. Anne is a lady who is unwell. She has a whole range of different health conditions, heart conditions, all kinds of chronic conditions. She can't walk to the bus stop. She can't reach up to wash her hair. And she has 9 specialist doctors. Now, of course, there are many parts in the world where you might think that 9 specialist doctors for free is a great thing, but actually it's part of the problem for Anne. Her whole life is defined by being ill and by making appointments to see these doctors. And when I get the doctors together, they tell me something that Anne already knows, which is the drugs don't work. And I think that Anne is part of a global problem that faces billions of us, which is that the health systems we had that were designed to cure infectious disease do not work for the many millions of people like Anne with chronic conditions. And if you think about it, our health systems are almost perfect models of mass industrial production. You're lined up, you're put in a queue, you're placed in a bed, and hopefully you're cured. And this is a culture, as you can see, of vertical integration. Doctors are allowed to do one thing, nurses are allowed to do another. Power is concentrated at the top, which was absolutely logical in the 1950s. This was the way of the world. And it was a very good system for curing infectious disease. But today, 70% of the expenditure in our health systems goes on people who cannot be cured. Anne and billions more need a new system, a system of horizontal networks, which includes professionals, but also includes peers, communities, and works in a different way, collaboratively, to focus on everyday challenges. And so what I'm arguing is that today we have this fundamental mismatch between these industrial, vertical systems and the social challenges that we face today and the challenges that we're seeing with this 4th industrial revolution. And I'm arguing that there are 3 reasons that we cannot actually improve the systems we have, and we have to reinvent. And the first reason is that we have new problems, challenges of aging, challenges of mass migration, chronic health conditions I've mentioned, the challenges of living on a fragile planet. And it's not just that these things were not foreseen in the post-war world when our systems were designed. It's that they're different in nature. These are a different kind of problem. And these problems cannot be solved by the command of a leader, a great CEO or a politician, however brilliant they are. The nature of these problems is that we need to collaborate to make change. We need to participate. And the thing is that our systems that were designed after the Second World War are designed actually to keep us out, to keep us at arm's length where we can be effectively managed. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is about the social and economic structures. So just to give you an example, in the post-war world, it was expected that women would do the care. They would care for the children, elderly relatives, neighbors, and actually our systems still implicitly expect women to do unpaid care, even though that is no longer the way of the world. And there's something deeper too. We have inherited a set of mindsets that sees problems as temporary blips on a stable path. You're temporarily out of work, you're temporarily unwell. But the nature of the problems today is not like that. We are facing constant, deep collective change. And so we need systems that can manage constant churn, that don't see a kind of stable norm as the ideal. And the third challenge we face is poverty. So the architects of our post-war social systems thought they would solve poverty. But today, poverty is back, inequality is growing, and poverty is also complex and has taken on new forms. In Britain, for example, we have something called in-work poverty. Almost half of British families are on welfare benefits because they are paid so little they can't survive. Something that would have utterly shocked the architects of our welfare systems. And there's something else, which is that poverty today is as much about relationships as it is about money. If you want a good job, if you want good health, if you want to be well taken care of in your elder life, it's all about your social connections. And the kind of welfare systems we have got nothing to say about this. So we need to work in a completely different way. So what did I do that day with the people who walked into my job centre? Well, it wasn't my job centre, but through the door that I created. I asked everybody to meet again together. And I asked everybody what they would do, because this is the way that I work. I work very small, I tinker, I try things out, I prototype, I fail early and cheaply. It's very different to the way that our social policy is usually created, which is create a very good policy, perhaps a good algorithm, roll it out through a mass industrial process, and hope that it will make change. I asked those people who are in work, out of work, and people who are cycling between jobs to come together. I ask people to meet in groups in public places, and we try things out. How we talk about ourselves, how we introduce ourselves. We use simple exercises to break down big, complex challenges into small pieces, and then think about what's the first step that we can take. So this is not about interviewing people and saying, what kind of qualifications do you have? How can I help you? It's about saying to people, what's your dream? What's the first practical step you need to take? And who can I connect you to make that possible? So a randomized controlled trial of the work that I build shows that this approach costs 20% less. 54% of those who are long-term unemployed find work. 87% progress in work, and 100% grow capability. And this work is enabled by technology. So we use simple available technology, mobiles, platforms, customer relationship management systems that we can hack. And this inverts the business model. This enables us to provide a low-cost service to many thousands with a small team and building kind of social connections that are already there in the community. And I think the important thing is that it's not about a LinkedIn for the unlinked. It's about people using technology to then get people together in the room building face-to-face relationships, because that's the way to support someone who's just starting out and needs work, or someone who perhaps has skills that are now obsolete that needs support to change. And we've used the same process with social health. So here you see Anne. We ask Anne, this is not a condition-specific health service. We ask you, what do you want to change in your life? How can we connect you to others to make that change and to sustain that change? And in the case of Anne, she said, well, the first thing she would like to do actually is to take up her sewing again, to do her embroidery. So the steps might look very unorthodox to clinical professionals, but once again, we see that the clinical data is very powerful. So I've used this way of working to provide clean water in Zambia, to work with families all over Europe that are locked out of society, to invent a new way to support elderly people. And what this does is it road tests a new framework. And this is what I would like to suggest we use for the fourth industrial revolution. And the first step in this framework is to recover the vision. Because in the 1940s, we thought really big. People had come out of war, out of deep recession, and we had huge hope. And the founders of our welfare systems didn't say, how can we manage the problems? There'll be winners and losers. How can we take care of the losers? What they said is, we have a new mode of production. We're going to create a different world. And I think everybody here is dedicated to that. So then the question becomes, what can we actually do? And I suggest we move from systems that manage need to those that create a core set of capabilities for each and every one of us so we can flourish in this century. So this is how we create a service for employment that doesn't just say, how can I put you into a job, but says, how can I work with you to grow the skills, the capability to change, to connect to others? That means that when the workforce changes again, you're already there, you have the skills. And this is a way of working that doesn't say, what can I do to you? It says, what would you like to do? I can't give you a relationship. I can't give you good health. But I can stand beside you and support you to grow these capabilities. So the next stage then is to think differently about how we connect resource together. These models are all about connecting public and private money, time, big corporations with small entrepreneurs, the state and the market. They're also about, as I've said, creating possibility with the person out of work, thinking about what they want to do, not just managing the risk. And they're about being open and taking care of everyone. These systems invert the usual logic, because if it's all about relationships, the more people who are in, the more resource we have, the more connections, the more we can make change. And we can use the resource we have in this century, technology, to make that change. Now, I suspect that many of you here this morning are doing similar kind of work. Actually, I think this work is everywhere. But the challenge we face is that at the moment it's on the margins. It's not well funded, it doesn't fit the traditional metrics, and so it's there, but it's on the outside. And the challenge we have is, how do we move this fantastic work, which many people are doing, from the margins to the center. As I say, after the Second World War, in the last century, we had ambitions for a new social order. And I want us to have those same ambitions for this fourth industrial revolution, to have a new system based on relationships underpinned by technology. So very, very briefly, just to wrap up, I'm going to suggest 5 quick things we could do now. So first of all, what we could do is we could reframe the problem. Instead of asking how we fix our existing systems, we could get into communities, we could ask people what they're doing, and we could build on that. Secondly, let's expand the disciplines involved in this conversation. For too long, we've looked narrowly through an economic lens. We need scientists, anthropologists, sociologists. We need to work in new ways. We need to draw, as I've said, on the resource we have in this century. We have not just new problems, but new resource, technology, and people who are skilled, who want to help and participate in the right systems. If you're a leader in business or policy, you need to ask, with everything you do, is this going to make the relationships that already exist in our communities and societies stronger, or is it going to cut a vertical line through them? We have to continue to enhance this and stitch people together. And then finally, we need a new operating framework, a new blueprint. In the 20th century, when our systems were created, not everything was new. But because we had new frameworks, where we put existing ideas into those new frameworks, education, health, and by operating in these new frameworks, things were transformed and societies were transformed. And we can do the same again today. So thank you very much for listening.
All right, as Dr. Cottam mentioned, she has a new book out up here, Radical Help, and so feel free to check it out online. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to take some questions. Obviously, Dr. Cottam here talked a lot about some really human-centric ways to really tackle some of the challenges that we have going into the fourth industrial revolution. So I'll throw out the first question, and we'll certainly open up to the audience. So I'm a technologist by training, and so you know, as part of the forum and a lot of the discussions that we have here, we think a lot about the disruption that's going on from technologies like automation, the gig economy, the shared economy, and whatnot. And so I'm curious to see, you know, as you sort of have taken these human-centric approaches, what challenges you see, you know, coming up over the course of the next 5, 10, 15 years, as it seems like a lot of these technologies continue to accelerate the disruption that we have, you know, in our world, you know, increasing social income inequality, you know, really challenging our existing sort of systems. What sorts of challenges do you see in your existing work today?
So I think one of the things is bringing those two worlds together, because what I see in my world is that we're still using very basic technology to try and fix a system. So, for instance, we use technology to tag prisoners so we can control them. We don't use it to educate them. We measure kind of people's health, but we're not using it to actually change health. So I think the challenge we have actually is how we harness the new forms of technology to actually make these systems work better at low cost. And how we start, because what I find is that nothing I do could work without technology. But too often, with technology, we think we've got this great piece of technology, how can we use it to make social change? And I think our challenge is to turn that on its head and say, how do we understand the social problem? And then, how do we invent the technology to make society change?
Yes.
Well, it's a very good question. Sorry? It's a very good question. Actually, because most of my work starts, because the question was, what do we do with many communities who are living around the world? So I would say there's two answers to that question. One is that all my work starts with people who are on the margins. And actually, that tends to be still people who don't move around. So we are able to meet in particular places. But not always. So one of the things that I've done is I've built a new service to support people who are elderly. And the big challenge with elderly people is that they usually live far from their families. That's the case in Britain, it's the case in China, it's the case all around the world. So there what we're doing is we're using technology to link people, to harness everything that is out there in new ways with people that are in concrete places. I think we can definitely do that, and that's part of the solution. I don't know. Sorry, I'm not. There's a question here.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Anusha. I'm a global shaper with the World Economic Forum. So my question is a little specific about what you mentioned about, you know, people, we're spending more on people who don't actually get cured by the healthcare, 70% you said. So if we're talking about human-centered design, how do we cater to these people in the absence of data and when there's, when it's not certain that the treatment is not going to work? Can we use technology or can we have a reinvented social system that caters to these people as well?
So all my health work caters to those people. And we designed it by going into communities and spending time in people's lives. So we had supper with them, we asked them to meet their friends, their relatives, we went out to play the games they play, went shopping with them, to really get inside people's lives. We move into their communities and we live alongside them to understand the problems. But once we've understood that and we've made the design, which is very much about people on which the data is poor and who are struggling in the existing systems, then what we've done with the health system is we've linked it actually to existing systems. So we sit in the clinics and we say to the doctors, in Britain we have this thing called the heart sink patient, which means the patient walks in and the doctor's heart sinks because they know the problem is so complex, it's not just one condition, and it's probably more social than clinical actually. So we say, please send us those patients. And then we start to work in the way that I've described. And actually, it's not condition specific, because what we want to do is switch around from a model that just sees kind of clinical problems and tries to chase that data to one that sees the social possibilities and starts to build on those. And once we do that, then we see the health improve. And we are actually collecting kind of very good data on those health improvements.
Yeah, over there in the front. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm just going to dive in. Hi, I'm Andrew, a global shaper from Beijing. My question was, so your point earlier you made was that in so many of the job opportunities we have in the fourth industrial revolution come through our networks and the people we know, yes. And that you know, people in different socioeconomic groups oftentimes have access to different opportunities. So I think, you know, these days we find that those groups are diverging more and more and more, and it's difficult to even get them to communicate. How do you actually bridge those communities to create the opportunities you're talking about?
Yeah, so this is a great question and goes to the heart of the matter. And more social research is showing exactly this, that we basically don't know each other anymore, at the same time that those relationships are becoming more powerful. So in the UK, for instance, you can go to a very elite university, but it will not change the kind of bedrock of where you've come from and what those relationships are. And so that's why I think our welfare systems are failing, because they can't see that. There's not good enough data, they can't see it, and then they can't change it. So what we do is the job work we do is not about, it's not a jobs club. It's not about getting people together who don't have work. It is about curating those communities where we can bring everybody together. So then the challenge is we have to think, what would make somebody who's working, let's say, in JP Morgan, come to be part of this club that is including people who are out of work and may have been out of work for a long time. Sometimes that is about people wanting to give back. A lot of people want to give back if it's made very simple and easy and doesn't take a lot of time. We provide very good tools so you can do this without a lot of prep. Design is a key part of it. Something else is also that people need, so one of the things is today, it's very hard to move up in middle management. You need to have experience of taking care of people, of managing them, facilitating stuff. So we provide those roles so actually people can use it in different work to progress in that work. And actually everybody is looking to progress. The easiest thing in the fourth industrial revolution is to get into low-paid work. The challenge is for all of us how we progress. So by building a culture that is around that progression, we find we can include many different kinds of people. Thank you. I think there's a lady here at the front.
Yes, in the front.
Okay. Sorry, there's a big gap between the urban and rural areas, and how this system could be restored, because right now most of the problems with migration comes from people from rural areas that have lack of opportunities to migrate into urban areas. Because right now we see that there's a lot of entrepreneurship programs, but those are in the urban areas. what about the truly needs of in agriculture or in many basic activities that are required for every human being?
Yes, this is a really fantastic question, and I would say two things to this question. So firstly, what I always say when I talk is, you can't just have a social system that's a sticking plaster. And one of the things that I really hope that we can discuss here in this forum, but more widely, is how does the fourth industrial revolution link to the fourth social revolution? Because we have to, you are asking a big economic question about how economies work. And we can't kind of have an economy that doesn't address this rural question and then hope that there's some welfare system that will just stick rural people back together. So it's really thinking from both sides, the economic and the social side. But having said that, we have found we have to, when we scale our work, to different places, different countries, but also rural areas, we have to think about how we design things in. So one challenge, for example, with our aging work is that in rural communities, people tend to live further away from each other, or in villages that might be isolated from other opportunities. So we have to think about how we flex those models, but we are able to flex them for rural areas. I mean, it's in the book. I can't really give a look, but I think it's a really important question because the same models work, but with tweaking, basically.
So I had a question. First of all, I'm happy to help you with the technology in Bath, but that's another thing. I had a question about your experience. You said several times that you've had successes with this, and I'm interested economically, is it that, that you're bringing the haves and have-nots together, or are you really finding ways to help the have-nots create something new so that that's bringing up their economy? I mean, tell me a little bit more about the nature of the economic successes that you've seen in some of these groups where you've moved in and helped facilitate this.
Okay, so I don't see a distinction between those two questions. I mean, any future social model has to bring everybody together for many reasons, because if you're, as what you say, a have-not, you need to have relationships with haves, but also because, you know, we're all going to age. Who is going to take care of us? This is not something about some people out there that need support and us. It's about all of us. But I think, so the economic modeling is on two sides. Part of my economic modeling is to say that the post-war welfare systems are simply unaffordable. And so what I'm producing models that work better socially but cost a lot less. So that's an important factor. But the other factor is, I do work with families that are unemployed, often living in places, to the previous question, very far from kind of any economic opportunity. So we have had a lot of success, actually, with thinking about how we connect those families into work from communities where nobody is working. But again, that is about not starting with somebody and saying, you must work, we must train you for work. It's about starting in a context with people's whole lives and saying, can we understand your life? Can we understand where you need to go? And then what we say is the families lead. So their first step may look unorthodox. It may not be about any of this, but it does eventually lead them to work.
So I believe we just have time for one more question here.
And so I'm not, it's in the book. It's limited how much kind of concrete I can go into.
Yes, right up here.
Hi, I'm Jatin. I'm a mechanical design engineer. So my question is, when we talk about quality of life, like a resourceful life, so like how do we define a metrics for that? As job satisfaction does play a huge part in it, like about your life satisfaction. But what are other factors that you can say? Because money cannot be one,
Yes.
because it's very dynamic, region-wise, or needs-wise, and then what?
So this is a really good question about the metrics. And so I measure the work. So first of all, I think the first thing is that the metrics have to relate to the vision. And the vision has to be big. It has to be, how do we flourish? It's like Aristotelian, like what is a good life, and therefore what are we going to measure, which goes to the heart of your question. And then, of course, there's a pragmatic side. So what I do in my work is I measure money. Like, what do things cost? Are we costing less? Because I'm always working in environments where there's not enough. Secondly, I say to people, what is your existing data? If you have a service to take care of older people, let's say as an example, what are you measuring, and how can I measure that for you? And I'll show you that we can do better. But the bigger problem then is that actually all those metrics are backwards facing, because they're all trying to kind of sort out the last century's problems. So then we have to also have our own metrics that fit alongside. And in the work I do, I've taken this capability framework and I've developed a core system of measures where people do measure internal feelings as well as external structural realities, and we're able to kind of gather that data. And that's a really important compass point, actually, for driving forward the future systems, because what they show is where do we need to go, and they put value on completely different things in people's lives. And I think that is absolutely critical to growing this kind of work. Thank you for asking.
Well, I believe that's all the time that we have today. I want to give Dr. Cottam a big round of applause here. There's a lot of things here in this topic, very exciting. Obviously there's a lot of things that we all can do, in terms of thinking about how we can contribute on a day-to-day basis. So I believe Dr. Cottam will be here afterwards to take any questions, but thank you all for coming out to this great session.